Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today, being a little bit festive, I am going to be covering something that the community has labeled as Christmas Tyrannomon. So the whole idea is you're basically just going to be playing a whole bunch of different types of Tyrannomon, and then you have Taiga to just give all of the synergies that Taiga offers to the Tyrannomon, play a little bit of green cards, and just kind of play a champion slash ultimate rush style of deck where you're just trying to win off of the back of Tyrannomon and pump them and give them a whole bunch of different abilities and make them very, very powerful and very, very threatening. So going over the deck list real quick, I am going to be running one copy of Yokomon. So Yokomon is pretty alright as a Digitama for the deck because she gives a nice when attacking ability of when attacking your opponent's Digimon, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP for the turn. So we're not really trying to attack into the opponent's Digimon a whole lot. It does happen every now and then, so like this is just an okay ability to have. And then as far as the main Digitama of the deck, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Bebydomon. So Bebydomon is really good for the deck because he has this nice inheritable ability where during your turn, while this Digimon has piercing, it gets plus 2000 DP. So this is really good for the deck because Taiga is a way to give all of our Tyrannomons piercing. So that means all of our Tyrannomons with Bebydomon and Taiga will get plus 2000 DP, and that's just pretty powerful. Next, on to the rookies of the deck. I'm going to be running 2 copies of Monodramon. So Monodramon is just the value vanilla. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Agumon. So this Agumon is really important for the deck because he has the powerful on-play ability where we get to check the top 5 cards of our deck and then add 1 tamer card among them into our hand, and then the rest go onto the bottom. So being able to fish or dig out our tamer, which is the whole Lich Pin card of the deck, is really important because we really need to see Taiga in order for our Tyrannomons to be as effective as they possibly can. Next, I'm running 4 copies of Guilmon. So this Guilmon is pretty good because he has a nice inheritable ability where during your turn, while the opponent has 5 or more cards in their trash, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So because we are playing mostly on the lower levels, which is going to be a lot of champions and ultimates, then we really need them to be as powerful as we possibly can, and Guilmon is just another really static good buff for them to have. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Agumon from the starter deck. So this version of Agumon is in here for the same reason why Guilmon's in here, where during your turn, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP, so we're really just looking for that DP buff. Next, on to the champions. I'm going to be running 4 copies of Tyrannomon. So this version of Tyrannomon is really, really powerful because he has the jamming ability. So the jamming ability means that he doesn't die to security checks against the opponent's security Digimon. So that's really important because it allows him to be a lot more aggressive. And then on top of which, if we have Taiga on the field, then he Digivolves for 1 instead of 2. And then on top of which, if we have Bebydomon and then Guilmon or Agumon in the evolution sources, then he could gain up to a plus 3000 DP boost. So that way he could hit over a lot of the blockers that the opponent might be having. So this just in combination with a whole bunch of other cards can make this card very, very dangerous and very, very sticky because he could hit over certain blockers and have jamming and have piercing and have his evolution cost reduced by 1 or more. So like it's just a very powerful card for the deck. Next up, I'm running 4 copies of DarkTyrannomon. So DarkTyrannomon is already a pretty decent card because he has a very low evo cost for 1, and then in combination with Taiga, which I'll get to in a moment, then we could reduce his evolution cost to 0. So he could basically be free to Digivolve with, and that's just already really powerful, on top of which he already has 6000 DP innately, so if we apply all of the same buffs, then he could hit up towards of 9000 DP, and make it very hard for the opponent to want to block because, again, Taiga can give piercing. So he is just an absolute monster for the deck as well. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Coredramon. So Coredramon is just the blocker of the deck, not really much else to him. And then lastly, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Greymon from the starter deck. So this Greymon from the starter deck is really powerful because he has this nice inheritable ability where he gives security attack +1. So that way, when we digivolve up into some of our higher levels, then they'll be able to hit for potentially more damage. Next, on to the Ultimates, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Skullgreymon. So Skullgreymon is pretty good because he has this nice on-play ability where we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with blocker. So in case we don't have all of our DP boosting effects in play, or if the opponent has a blocker that is bigger than what our Digimon can clear, then Skullgreymon is really great for dealing with those higher level blockers that could be very, very problematic for our deck to be going up against. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of MetalTyrannomon. So MetalTyrannomon is just another Tyrannomon, and what makes this card really, really powerful is the fact that he innately just has 10,000 DP. So if we apply all of the same buffs from before on top of him, and then if we even have a Greymon in the inheritable sources, then this card can just be an absolute monster for the opponent to deal with, just because he could hit 13,000 DP, have security attack +1 and piercing, which is just very, very powerful for the ultimate level to be able to reach, and it's all just a very, very powerful card. And then on top of which, again, because Taiga synergy, we could even lower his Digivolution cost, so he could just be more efficient to Digivolve with. Then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Metal Greymon. So this Metal Greymon is very powerful just because he has this nice inheritable ability where during your turn, when this Digimon is blocked, then you gain +3 memory. So obviously the whole idea is for our Digimon not to be blocked, so it really incentivizes the opponent not to block, but if they do have to block our Digimon, then we are going to be gaining 3 memory from that, and there is a lot that we could do with the 3 memory. Next, on to the Megas, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Puppetmon. So Puppetmon is a pretty clutch card because not only is he green and he has an on-play ability, so we don't necessarily need to worry about digivolving up into him, but he has a very powerful on-play ability where we get to suspend one of the opponent's Digimon, and then during the opponent's next unsuspend phase, they can't unsuspend any of their Digimon. So that's just really powerful because if we're trying to damage race the opponent, then Puppetmon can just stunlock basically their whole field, and then we could go in on either their Digimon because Taiga piercing, or we could go into their security and try to really push for the game, and then on top of which he has a nice when attacking ability of gaining 1 memory. So this card is just an overall fantastic card for the deck and has some great synergy because we still need to have some green cards on the field to be able to play our green options if they are not in our security. Next, I'm running 3 copies of Breakdramon. So Breakdramon is a pretty overlooked mega considering he just has the piercing ability. So this way we don't necessarily need all of the Taiga synergy to have a Digimon with piercing for Bebydomon. So Breakdramon is just a really, really solid mega for the deck overall just because of that innate piercing ability, and on top of which we could apply all of the same buffs to just, again, make a very, very powerful Digimon where he could have some really high DP, he could have security attack +1 if he's blocked to gain us 3 memory. Like, there's just a lot this card can do, and as a result, that's kind of just why this card is really good for the deck. And then the last mega of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Greymon from the starter deck. So you could play the Greymon from the booster set, but like if you're already going to be getting some starter deck cards, you're just going to already have Greymon from the starter deck. Plus, I also feel like for this style of deck, Greymon from the starter deck is just a little bit better, just because he has a overall higher damage output because of his ability. So his ability is during your turn for every 2 Digivolution sources on this card, this Digimon gains security attack +1. So fully stacked, this Digimon hits for 3 whole security because he'll get 2 security attack bonuses from his 4 Digivolution sources. So he just allows you to push for even more damage, and on top of which he is really, really solid just because, again, like, if we can't necessarily get our like Tyrannomon gameplay going, then he is just a great alternate win condition for the deck. I'm not super afraid of him dying to the security because we still have a whole bunch of ways of buffing him, and then on top of which I'm not really that afraid of options because most people aren't really playing a whole lot of options outside of a very small handful, and half the time, sometimes the options might not even do anything. That's why I am preferring this Wargreymon over the booster set Wargreymon. Next, in terms of options go, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Flower Cannon. So Flower Cannon is really, really powerful because for the low memory cost of 2, you get to suspend one of your opponent's Digimon down, which again could help take care of some pesky blockers that we might not be able to deal with otherwise. And then on top of which, it has a really powerful security ability where we get to suspend all of the opponent's Digimon without blocker. So this allows us to use Taiga's piercing ability for all of our Tyrannomons to just be able to beat up on their Digimon if they don't have blocker. If they do have a blocker and we just want to rest it to get through, then we can do it. This card just is very, very good and has a whole bunch of application for the deck. And then the last option that I'm going to be running is 2 copies of Terraforce. So again, Terraforce is just a very, very powerful option card where we just get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon, and then its security ability is activating its main ability to basically just delete one of the opponent's Digimon. So if there's just a threat that we can't really deal with, then Terraforce is very, very good for just cleaning up those threats. And then the last card of the deck is going to be the only tamer of the deck, at least in this version, and that is going to be 4 copies of Taiga. So Taiga is a very, very important tamer for the deck, considering the whole deck kind of revolves around him, so he has just a lot of abilities going on with him. So his main ability is during your turn, all of your Digimon with Tyrannomon gain piercing. So that means all of our Tyrannomons gain piercing, which really sets off our Bebydomon as the main Digitama to be able to give them some insane buffs on top of any other buffs our rookies are giving them. So that's just really, really important, and it allows us to get through blockers because if they block with the blocker, then they'll still be taking security damage, and allows us to really want to try to beat up on their Digimon because if they have a Digimon rested and our Tyrannomon can kill it, as long as Taiga's on the field, it'll get piercing and they'll still be able to do security damage to the opponent. So this card, just giving all of our Tyrannomons piercing, is just really, really good. And then on top of which, he has another really powerful ability where during your turn, when you Digivolve one of your Digimon into a Tyrannomon from your hand, then you could suspend this tamer and reduce the memory cost of that Digivolution by 1. So this is just really powerful because a lot of our Tyrannomons are already kind of either normally efficient or hyper efficient, and this card just makes Digivolving into our Tyrannomons that much easier, so we could gain a whole bunch more tempo, and we're not really afraid of having a whole bunch of Taigas on field because we could just stack that ability. Note that this does not work in the raising area, so you can't just Digivolve it into them from the raising area. That's kind of like the no man's zone where no abilities really work and no abilities really target it. But if there's a Digimon on the field and you have multiple Taigas out and you're Digivolving into a Tyrannomon, then you can reduce its memory cost, which helps you either A, get into your higher stages, or B, just allows you to play your Tyrannomons that much more efficiently. And then in terms of other cards you could possibly think about running in the deck, you could run Bebydomon because Bebydomon is just another Digimon that gives a DP boost, except the DP boost is only when the Digimon is blocked, and if the whole idea is to try to have them not be blocked and DP boost our Digimon, then Bebydomon is only kind of doing half of that. So it's just another card you could run. You could also run Grounddramon, so if you really are just trying to go into Breakdramon and want to focus a little bit harder on Breakdramon, then you could run Grounddramon because Grounddramon is just a value-efficient vanilla card to try to get into your Megas a lot faster and a lot more efficiently than some of the other Ultimates. If you want to double down on your Megas or just play a little bit harder into some piercing strategies, then you could play Garudamon. So Garudamon's really good because it innately has piercing, so it just works with all of our cards already because our cards kind of already assume that you have piercing. And then on top of which, if we do Digivolve this into Breakdramon or any of our other level 6s, then its inheritable ability, where during your turn, when this Digimon is blocked, you get to draw 1 card, is also a very good upside. So if you use this with Greymon and they block him, then you'll be gaining some additional benefit for him being blocked. So that way they're trying to save on the damage, but you're still getting rewarded. Like I said, if you wanted to, you could run the Greymon from the booster set over the Greymon from the starter deck. The abilities are a little bit different. This one's a little bit more cost efficient, but it is slightly weaker in terms of the overall damage output and survivability. So it has a nice when digivolving ability where it gains security attack +1. So the turn you digivolve into it, if you can attack with it, then he's just going to have security attack +1, so he's going to check for 2 just off of his own ability. But what's really important about the card is during your turn, this Digimon doesn't activate security skills of the opponent's option cards. So that's the main reason why you would play him, is if you're really afraid of the opponent's option cards and the security just ruining your day, then this Greymon is a lot safer to attack with on the opponent's security. Next, if you wanted, you could run Volcanicdramon. So Volcanicdramon is kind of just that tech card that you could replace Puppetmon with, where it's just a very powerful on-play mega, where the whole idea is it'll innately have security attack +1, so it's already going to be a huge threat onto the opponent's security, and then on top of which, its on-play ability is deleting all of the opponent's Digimon with 4000 DP or less. I feel like this ability is a little bit less relevant for the deck, just because if they are rested, then we could just beat them up with our Tyrannomons, and then with Taiga on the field, the piercing damage will still deal damage to them anyway. But if you're in a very tight situation where they're just building too wide of a board of a whole bunch of small things and you can't really deal with it because Puppetmon doesn't exactly deal with it in the same way, Volcanicdramon is just, again, a very, very powerful tool to use for just dealing with a whole bunch of potential different problems. Next, if you really wanted to, you could play Gravity Crush. So Gravity Crush is another very overlooked card where for 0, you're just gaining 2 memory, but the only trade-off is you have to give that 2 memory back at the end of the turn. So depending on the setup, you could figure out a way to mitigate that problem, where it's just like, oh, I'm going to put my opponent at 1. If they have a tamer that does memory fixing, then they're going to go to 3 anyway. So you could use this card not only to extend your plays, but to try to mitigate some downside that the opponent might have based on the opponent's board state. But it's still just a very decent card, and I feel like it's a very overlooked card. Next, you could also think about running Shadow Wing. So Shadow Wing is pretty solid just because it is a 1-cost option that just DP buffs one of your Digimon by 3000, so it makes it even harder for the opponents to deal with your Digimon, and it makes our Digimon survive security checks that much easier by having even more DP. And then on top of which, its security effect is also pretty nice, where all of your Digimon gain security attack +1 until the end of your next turn. If you really wanted to play a tamer to memory fix, then Taikamiya is currently your best option, just because he already has that memory fixing ability built in, and then if your Digimon is red and has 4 or more Digivolution cards in its source, then it'll get security attack +1. So this just helps your megas deal even more damage, but we're not necessarily trying to go into our megas, because, again, we're just trying to play Taiga and a whole bunch of Tyrannomon. But if you're in a very tight situation where you need to go Mega and you need to deal extra damage, then Tai is really good for that. But the memory fixing ability is really the only real reason why you would be playing this card in the deck. You could also think about running Sora, just because Sora is another way to DP boost your Digimon, because she has the nice ability where during your turn, when one of your red Digimon attacks a player, you could suspend this tamer and give it plus 2000 DP for the turn. So this just makes, whenever we're attacking the opponent's Digimon, it just makes it harder for the opponent to just deal with our Digimon, just because they're going to be DP boosted even more, and because we're dealing with a lot of lower levels, we really do need that DP boost, so that's what makes Sora a relatively decent card. And then if you just want more like generic DP boosting, you could run Taikamiya from the starter deck, just because, again, he has the static ability of during your turn, all of your Digimon get plus 1000 DP. So it costs less than Sora, its buff is less than Sora, but its buff is a little bit better than Sora's just because it helps everyone, and it's a little bit more static. But again, it's just another potential option of another card you could run. You could also think about using promo Bebydomon. So this Bebydomon has the nice inheritable ability where when this Digimon deletes one of your opponent's Digimon by battle and survives, you get to draw one card. Again, with Taiga, we're going to be trying to rely a little bit heavier on piercing, and we want to be able to beat up on the opponent's Digimon, and Bebydomon is great because it draws us a card for doing that strategy. And then if you want to lean a little bit more into the green side of things, you could play Palmon. So Palmon has this really great ability where it's on play, so you don't need to Digivolve up into it, and then you get to reveal 3 cards out from the top of your deck, and then add 1 level 4 into your hand, and then the rest go to the bottom. So a lot of our Tyrannomons are level 4, so that's really what we're looking for, on top of which Palmon is green, so it allows us to play a little bit heavier into that green side of things. And then if you want to play the green line of Tyrannomons, you could do that as well because Palmon allows you to play a little bit more into the green side of things. And then the green Tyrannomon line is also just very, very powerful. So you have the green version of Tyrannomon, where he has the nice when Digivolving ability, you get to check the top 3 cards of your deck and then add 1 level 5, and then add 1 green tamer among them into your hand, and then place the rest on the bottom of your deck. So this helps us dig out our tamers, which our main tamer is Taiga. That's the one we really want to see. And it also helps us dig out our level 5s, so we could dig out either of the MetalTyrannomons with this, and we don't necessarily feel too bad about doing that. So this card is also just very solid, and on top of which it is just another Tyrannomon for all of the Taiga synergy. You could also think about running the green MetalTyrannomon, again, if you're playing more into the split side where you're going to be playing the green Tyrannomon line. The green MetalTyrannomon is very, very powerful because for his level, he has a low evolution cost. And then he gives a very powerful inheritable ability where during your turn, when this Digimon deletes one of the opponent's Digimon, if it's level 6 or higher, then you get to unsuspend this Digimon. So this just really combos with Rust Tyrannomon and is a very good card to have in the evolution source of Rust Tyrannomon. But again, because he is just another Tyrannomon, we still have a whole bunch of different ways to utilize the card. And then if you really wanted to cap off the green Tyrannomon line, you could also run Rust Tyrannomon. So Rust Tyrannomon is an absolute beast of a card, especially with Taiga and especially fully equipped with MetalTyrannomon in its evolution source. So it has 2 really powerful abilities. So its first ability is when you have a green tamer in play, this Digimon can attack your opponent's unsuspended Digimon. So if we have Taiga in play, then he could just attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon, which is very, very powerful because it allows you to pick them off. And then Taiga gives the piercing ability, so you'll also be able to deal security damage on top of that. And then he has another ability of his own, where during your turn, when this Digimon deletes one of your opponent's Digimon and survives, then you get to suspend one of the opponent's Digimon down. So not only could he beat up on any of the opponent's Digimon, he's also resting the opponent's Digimon, and then again, the whole point of Taiga synergy is the piercing, so your other Tyrannomons can attack the suspended Digimon, and you'll be able to do piercing damage that way as well. And then on top of which, if you have MetalTyrannomon in its source, then this card just wipes out the opponent's field and could wipe out the opponent's security basically in one go. And that's just really, really powerful to think about if you're playing into this line. So for the most part, this is just the Christmas Tyrannomon deck, and I think it's a really solid deck. Depending on how you build it, it could be a rather affordable deck because you don't really need a whole lot of the SRs, and then you can make a whole bunch of different changes and adjustments to it and be perfectly fine because really the core of the deck is just Taigas and then all of the red Tyrannomons. And then again, if you wanted to play the green Tyrannomons, you could do that as well. So like there's just a whole bunch of different ways you could play this deck. This is just how I feel like the deck wants to be played because we really don't want to lean too heavily into the green side of things just because, again, consistency issues. But I just feel like this is, for the most part, a really solid deck. It's probably an overlooked deck, and I definitely really like what this deck is doing and think the deck is really fun. Even if you're not going to be winning all the time, it just has a whole bunch of different power plays that it can make and really surprise your opponent, and that surprise factor really could play to your benefit. So that's kind of all I really have for this video. As always, tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video.